Hi, everybody. Good morning and welcome to Data is Love. I am super excited to have Prem join us this morning. Prem, I love the product that you've been building, and I'm like super fan and constantly promoting you. But I think that what you're building is so important from the point of view of closing the opportunity gaps, right? And helping organizations quickly and successfully make really great hires, pay attention to where there's bias in their own process, and just do better. And so if we can start with a quick introduction, tell us a little bit about who you are and what led you to start Humanly.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. Prem Kumar, CEO and co-founder of Humanly. So my background is really on the intersection of people and data. So I spent about 10 years at Microsoft working on our global HR solutions. I then went to a startup in Seattle, Tiny Pulse, where we're focused on measuring employee engagement. At Humanly, we help companies hire and retain at scale through more equitable, efficient, and empathetic conversations with their job candidates and employees. Where I kind of first started thinking about this problem space was actually when I was just graduating from the University of Washington. It was a good time in the economy. There was a lot of job opportunities, and I had a colleague of mine, and she was more technical than I. She was a better student than myself. We went in and interviewed with the same exact interview panels, same companies, 30 minutes apart. So she'd come out of an interview and give me some tips. She would say, "Hey, this is a really technical one. They grill you on your technical skills." And I'd walk in and I was worried because if she thinks it's a technical interview, I'm in trouble. I'm not very technical. And I would find that they didn't ask me any technical questions. And as I got older and more experienced in the space, I started to realize that it's not necessarily just a problem of interviewers being bad or inconsistent. They just don't have the tools and data to be fair and consistent in many ways. So that was kind of the genesis. And fast forward, we started this company about 2.5 years ago.
That's amazing that you had that nugget all the way back in the day, maybe not that long ago. I also actually the thing that's led me to start my company, also the point of origination was in grad school. Okay, so I have to ask you, like, what exactly is conversational AI? Every time I go to your website, you talk about it, and I don't really understand what that means.
Yeah, certainly. So I think typically it's been used to define kind of the tools like chatbots or agents that will talk to humans and humans can interact with them. We're trying to expand that definition beyond just the human talking to technology, but how can we also help humans have better conversations? And when I say better, I mean more impactful, more empathetic, more effective. So to me, conversational AI is any application of AI to have a better conversation with a human, whether it's helping a human do that or whether it's helping a kind of automated solution like a chatbot do that.
Can you give me an example of what it means to help humans have better conversations? What does that really look like in our work life?
Yeah, so one thing that's changed now is there's a lot of stuff is happening in Zoom. A lot of stuff's happening in Microsoft Teams. So you can actually measure what you couldn't before. You can measure how effective an interview might be or a meeting. So, simple things such as, am I showing up on times to my interviews consistently can now be measured. And if you're going to have an empathetic conversation, it doesn't help to start it by being 5 minutes late. So being able to actually, you can't change what you can't measure. And I think there's a lot of data now being created because we are in this virtual environment conversating. And one other example is, measuring things like reflective listening and empathy. And can that actually help you convert a candidate that might have not all been ready to convert to the next stage? So those are some of the things that we're seeing.
All right, you've used the word empathy maybe like 5 times now, and I love the focus on empathy because I feel like it's such a good way to build bridges, right? Just because empathy requires a great deal of awareness. What I'm curious about is um, where is like, what's that tension between privacy for hiring managers and like addressing biases?
Mhm.
What like where yeah like because I think that part of the challenge of letting AI support, I don't want to say govern, but AI supporting our lives, helping us have better conversations, make decisions, right? It asks, it just puts us in the space where we're having questions about, I think, ethics.
Mhm.
We're having questions about privacy. And so, how do you, with your product, help negotiate some of those things?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's certainly a lot there. Partly just how you build the systems, audit the systems, have external audits of the systems, and then also kind of the change management around how you get people comfortable with it. So, I would say first getting the basics right. So part of the basics is, do you have a diverse team that you're building this tool with? So one of my goals when we started the company, I have an OKR goal for our startup to be 50%, at least 50% people of color, 50% diverse from a gender standpoint. So do you have the team that is building this the right way? So I think building trust starts with building it in the right way. With a lot of these AI algorithms, what you put in is what you get out. So if they say, if you put crap in, crap out. So I think if you put in solid data and you can audit that, there's systems out there that help you actually audit your algorithms, audit kind of the validity of the training data you're using. So I think building trust starts with how the system is built. And then once you have a product, let's say it's built in a way that's ethical, it's solving the right problems. People, as you mentioned, can still be uncomfortable. What is this thing doing? So I think providing the right privacy methods so that they don't necessarily have to share their personal data, but we can have it show, hey, in an anonymized aggregate way, here's what's happening in this part of your organization, and here's what you can do to fix it. And also highlighting the positive, here's where people are doing well. But to your point, it is a balance. Like the more anonymized and aggregated it is, it also becomes a little less actionable. So how do you find that middle ground?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit. Um, and I'm thinking about, when we first met, one of the things that you did that I loved was you pulled up this PowerPoint presentation and you were like, here's all the things that we're learning, right? And some of it's good and some of it's not so great. But what you have been learning through implementing your platform is that different kinds of biases show up at different parts of the process. Some of them are gendered. Will you walk us through a couple of the things that you're seeing? Where does bias show up? What does it actually look like? Because I think the word bias is, often a stand in for something that's not going well, which we know is not the case, right? Bias is just a preference or prejudice for one thing or another. And how is then that data about biases helping companies do better?
Yeah, so we're primarily focused on kind of the interview scenario and a little bit before that, so I can share what we're learning there. There's been a lot of amazing attention being put into creating diverse pipelines of candidates, so having diverse people enter the interviews, but really that equity, inclusion, and belonging journey to me starts once you start having that conversation. It starts in the interview with candidates, and some of the things we're learning. It's hard to not be biased if you're being completely inconsistent. So we start by measuring inconsistencies. So one thing we found in our data with a handful of customers is women were consistently getting 10 minutes less to speak in interviews than their male counterparts. So we can now begin to measure things like if there's a pause in conversation, is someone jumping in? Are you starting the meeting on time? Are you actually having as long of a meeting, or are you ending it? One other interesting thing that seemed mundane at first, but it has has a strong correlation to candidate conversion and sentiment is also around kind of the small talk and rapport building. So we found that in some cases, depending on gender, some small talk and rapport building might be doled out unfairly to different groups. Part of that had to do with even proximity bias. So if it's a Seattle interviewer interviewing a Seattle candidate, they were much more likely to spend time on small talk. Maybe it might be also a male interviewer and a male candidate. But if more time is spent on small talk, by the time you actually get to the meat of the interview, you already have a higher sentiment towards the candidate, which can be measured. We can measure that, and you have less time to actually ask questions. So that's one of the things that we've been noticing, a lot of inconsistency in structure, small talk, how you're approaching the interview itself.
The consistency piece is really interesting. My colleague Nicole Decay, who I think you've also met, like I think I often joke that like she lives her life and like sees the world through a series of spreadsheets. And consistency is something that she's really big on, and in particular, structured interviews, right? Like using the same format, the same set of questions for every candidate, because that's the small talk inconsistencies is where a lot of the bias enters the process, right? Like if you're already feeling warm and fuzzies for somebody who goes hiking in the same exact spots for you, you're more likely to put them forward in the process. And so when data like this shows up, what do you say to your client or your customer? What does that conversation look like? And like, is there a customer that you've had for long enough where in their data you've seen them start to close these gaps?
Yeah, 100%. And one thing I'll touch on as I answer that is, I'm definitely a fan of structured interviewing, and I think there's a movement towards that. And I also, there's sometimes a fear that, hey, does structured interviewing mean we're going to be extremely robotic and that we're taking the human out of it? And no, that's not the case. I think there's what tools like us are trying to do is help empower you to have better conversations and relate to candidates. It's okay to do those things, but having structure makes a lot of sense. So what we're starting to see, a couple examples. We had a company here in Seattle that was really struggling with hiring engineering talent. So the conversion rate, offer acceptance rate for engineers was pretty low, but they were doing very well with all other kinds of engineers. And when we really broke that down, there were some, particularly when it was women engineers, that was an even lower conversion rate. So what they were able to do is actually look at what topics that they're bringing up in their interview lead to the highest sentiment from a candidate standpoint. And you can look at that based on gender, based on person of color versus not. And what they found is that for most engineering candidates, they might have already known this. Remote work is obviously a big thing, but by just bringing it up in a more structured way, in a more proactive way, bringing up the topic of remote work at the beginning, at the end, and really having a talk track around that remote work was the only topic we found across the board for their engineers that was correlated to offer acceptance rate. So then they started talking about it more, having a structure around it, and the conversion rate went up. The same thing happened in the case where I mentioned around women getting less time to talk with one of our customers. When they actually then went and implemented that, we saw a change. Implemented it by, leaving time for questions, making sure they're on time, not interrupting as much. So yeah, these things do affect kind of bottom line from a candidate conversion standpoint.
That's pretty rad. I can't imagine like a manual scenario if somebody would have picked up on the fact that like women are drawn to remote work or that's a priority. So talking about that earlier is really important. That's pretty rad. So did their offer acceptance ratio get better?
Yeah. So what we do, the answer is yes, and it's a work in progress. So there's like we're a technology. Technology is not going to solve all your problems. So I do think part of this is you need to be it's a holistic process, right? So it did change, but it changed because we shed a light on it, and then they put in some training that happened offline, and then we measured again, right? So I think having that whole flywheel in place is really important.
Okay, so we've been talking about women's experience for a couple of minutes. Um, And you've started to name some of the impact, right? One impact is they're less likely to accept an offer. What are some of the impacts that you see to companies when women get less time to talk, or there's less, like favorable positive sentiments or rapport building? Um, yeah.
Yeah, well, one impact is you have a less gender diverse company, and by that you have a worse performing company. So I think that's one impact. I think generally when we look at like conversion, so if your end goal is to have a more diverse workforce,
Mhm.
you can't just invest in a diverse pipeline. You can get a pretty good set of diverse candidates, but you need to start that journey when you first engage with them. Another thing we've had a few customers that'll start inviting our analytics to stay interviews and exit interviews, and oftentimes I don't have this data for women specifically, but what one of our thesis is that generally we are seeing across the board things like, to use the word empathy again, but things like empathy are going down after the initial honeymoon period of hiring someone. So one of the theories we have that hopefully we'll be able to find out more about, hopefully it's not a problem, but that with these groups that are underrepresented, are they more likely to have a lot of stuff happening up front to get them in, but then then there's other outside research on this, but as they get in, are they more likely to turn over? Is retention going to be hard because you're not continuing to be equitable and efficient with them? So there's other research there, but we're also looking at, can we bring that into helping people have better stay interview conversations and exit interview conversations?
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, I feel like we're seeing that a lot, and the data bears out, right? Like anybody who is quote unquote diverse in an organization, which I think is just like polite speak for they're a person of color, they're an immigrant, there's some other underrepresented group, they might be women in male dominant fields. That all of the work that happens to get them in the door, then there isn't work to keep them there because the dynamics of the organizations are such that it's not a great place for them to continue to be at. I'm just curious, right? Like with tools like conversational AI and all of the things that you're seeing with your customers, why is it that more companies aren't using tools like this? Why is it that in many ways HR organizations are still pretty manual when it comes to hiring, recruiting, right? And recruiters aren't necessarily leaning into sort of data driven approaches to better who they attract and hire.
Hmm. Maybe I just need to get on more podcasts and to get out there. Maybe that's why. No, I think I think with any kind of change, it does take time, and I like how I'm seeing, we see a lot of investments in training, but if you're training on unconscious bias, if you're training on interview efficacy, is that actually working? So a lot of things that we find that works is kind of getting in process for what's already happening. So if we know you've made a training investment, okay, let's measure, is it working? And I do think some tools have maybe taken an approach that's a little bit throwing technology at a human driven process. So we can't just automate everything or produce these magical insights. It takes work, and it takes executive sponsorship. It takes people inside the organization to create those changes, to do the training, to so and there have been folks at companies that I talk to, buyers that have been burned in the past because they thought that they were kind of sold a technology that they felt was just going to change everything, but it's not easy. This stuff isn't easy. So it will take time. I do think things are changing. I feel like people are more open to trying solutions like that. And it's up to us as technology vendors to be honest and upfront about what we're delivering, what we need from you to make this successful. And I think if that happens, then there's going to be a lot more success.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to do a really quick recap because I think you said some really important things. You said that if, people are investing in trainings and you need to measure to see if it's working. Absolutely. Tools, you said some tools are throwing tech at a human driven process, but it takes a lot of work by sponsors, leaders inside of an organization, for I think the implementation to create different results. But what you said, the last thing that you said, I think is the most important, which is we have to be honest as vendors, as like creators of new products, about what the capability of that product is. And like none of these products are a magic bullet. And I think this is where, I'm thinking back to a conversation I had with one of my mentors, where they were talking about blinding resumes or blinding certain parts of a person's resume, and they said something really poignant, which is great. Like you can blind the resume, but at some point in the process, the hiring manager is going to meet the candidate, and if that candidate is has all of these identities and it triggers biases for the hiring manager. It doesn't matter that they got this far by having their resume blinded. They're probably not going to move ahead. So blinding resumes is like a band-aid solution. You're not addressing the actual root cause. So being honest as tech vendors. Okay, I have one sort of last questions, which
Yeah.
is when I think about, people, companies that are adopting solutions like Humanly, right? And to some extent, even ours, it leaves out a lot of small companies. It leaves out social sector organizations in particular. I'm thinking nonprofits and philanthropy, because people have this idea that like products are hard to implement. They might take a very long time to implement. There are definitely data scaries that people have, or math scaries that people have. And ultimately, it's too expensive and out of reach. And so, what would you say is the ROI in particular for smaller organizations, and organizations in the social sector?
Yeah, so I would say one thing is changing just in the state of where conversational AI is. It is becoming much easier to kind of land quickly without needing large sets of training data and three month onboarding times. I think the tools that are succeeding are the ones that are integrated into workflow. Not like with ours, you don't even have to sign into it, right? So I think that is important. In terms of being deeply integrated. And I do want to make sure I hit the second part of that question.
Which is like, what's the ROI for like
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
smaller organization? Why should
yeah.
they
To,
start using products like yours?
Yeah, yeah. So I think as a small organization, obviously you're looking to save time, and what I feel that AI in its truest form can do, and conversational AI can do in its truest form, is help take things that would have taken lots and lots and lots of time to do, like listening to a bunch of calls or reading through 300 resumes, and they can help make those things happen faster in its truest form. So I actually think there's a huge time savings value prop here. Also, as you think about bringing candidates in, it's extremely expensive if you can't retain them to go out and hire again. So I think investing a little bit more upfront, but the tools aren't as expensive as they once were. So investing a little bit more upfront in some of these middle price tools, I should say, can go a long way. And the prices are coming down just by the state of where the AI landscape is.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that? What's the best way?
Awesome. So we have a QR code if you are interested in getting one of our free interview efficacy reports, which we can throw up here on the screen. But if you want to get a hold of me, you can look me up on LinkedIn, on Twitter at Prem Kumar Tweets. And you're also welcome to email me, prem@humanly.io.
Brilliant. Prem, thank you so much. I feel like every time I talk to you, I learn something new every single time, without a doubt. And this time was no different. Thanks for joining us. I know it's Monday morning. You're a parent. There's a lot happening in the world. And I hope to anybody that's watching, if nothing else, right? Like, check out the power of tools like Humanly, and the value of having this, like, I just think of it as like a smart little robot behind the scenes that's making your life a little bit better, faster, and easier. And ultimately, there are tools that help us do better, because I think as human beings, there is so much going on, and sometimes we're not on point, right? All of the training on like a day where there's stressful things happening in our lives, all of that training kind of goes to the back, and all of our default functionings kick in. And so I love the idea that there's this like accountability mechanism of sorts, right? That conversational AI can provide for us as people that hire others and want to keep them around for a while. So thank you so much. Everybody that's watching, have a great day, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks for having me.